everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all well. And if you are new, thanks so much for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today I am going to be talking about the books that I finished in April. I read 15 books in April. 6 of those books, though, were part of the Picture This 2022 readathon. And that was hosted by Shelly from Shelly Swearingen's Library and also by Jack from Spread Book Joy. So I already did a video talking about those 6 picture books. So if you're interested in that, I will leave a link to it below in the description box. I also read Margaret Atwood's newest book, and I will be doing a review of that, which will be out on Monday, so stay tuned for that. And I also finished a book for the BookTube prize, which I can't talk about just yet, so that leaves us with 7 books to still talk about. And I have several books that I still have on the go that I started, but these are the ones that I actually finished in April. So in April I did a number of buddy reads, so I'm going to start with those, and then as usual I'm going to start with the first line of each book. And the first book begins like this. When Augustus came out on the porch, the blue pigs were eating a rattlesnake, not a very big one. And this is from Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which I actually read with Olly from Crim and Olly, and it was in March mostly. This was my March of the Mammoths book, which I didn't finish until the first probably day or two in April. Now, Olly read this huge book in about 10 minutes, and it took me a little bit longer, but I really enjoyed this book. It really is an epic story. I thought that the characters were so well developed, and it didn't hurt that I was also binge watching the series Yellowstone at the same time that I was reading this. Unfortunately, Olly didn't have access to Yellowstone, but at first I thought, they were similar for the obvious reasons. They're both westerns, there's cowboys, there's even men making biscuits on the fire, on the campfire. So I kept thinking that, Lonesome Dove wasn't as violent as Yellowstone, but as I kept reading, it turns out that Lonesome Dove has, definitely it has its share of violence too. So my favorite part of this book was definitely the characters. I really liked several of the characters. And the ones that I didn't really care for, I wasn't supposed to care for, but they were written so well. And I also liked, I think Olly mentioned this as well, but I really liked how funny it was. There are some very funny parts and lines, and yet at the same time there is a lot of depth to it too. There are some key scenes and lines that are very profound. And I also like that McMurtry wasn't afraid to kill off characters. Even the ones that I grew attached to, it was a little gut-wrenching sometimes, but it also made it very real. So I really enjoyed this, and thanks to Olly for reading this with me. I will leave a link to Olly's video on Lonesome Dove in the description box below, because he did a great review as well. So you can check that out. And this book would be for anyone who, enjoys character-driven novels, westerns, obviously. You do have to be okay with the violence and some of the language as well. The second buddy read begins, accidents ambush the unsuspecting, often violently, just like love. And this is from The Gargoyle by Andrew Davidson. I read this book with Karen Weatherald, who is a subscriber and has become a friend through a few buddy reads. We've done probably about 3 or 4 now, and I'm so glad that we read this together because first, it has been on my shelf for well over 10 years, I would say. And second, it's kind of a strange book. There's a lot going on in this one, and I think I may not have finished it if it wasn't for reading it with Karen. But I'm glad that I did. So the thing that I loved most about this book was the writing. I wish that Andrew Davidson, had published something else, because I would like to read something else by him. This pulled me in from the very beginning. I loved that the narrator, and this is especially at the beginning, I don't remember it so much towards the end, but the narrator talks directly to the reader a number of times. And the story begins with a young man who gets into a very serious car crash and is badly burned from the crash. Many of those scenes are quite descriptive, and I would say even gory. There are several storylines all intertwined. You have the young man and his time in the burn unit at the hospital. And then he meets Marianne Engel, who is a nun and is in the hospital. She tells this burn victim, who we never know his name, she tells him stories about how they met, and kind of in a past life or in another time. It gets a little confusing, and for the longest time I wasn't even sure that she actually existed, or if she was a figment of his imagination or some kind of hallucination. There's a bit of a fairy tale mythology kind of vibe to it. So the young man has a history of addiction to drugs. He was also in the porn industry, and now he's burnt beyond recognition. And what I found surprising is that as the story goes on, it becomes more about Marianne, I would say, than it is about the young man. And there's a lot of symbolism, and I'm sure a lot of it went like way over my head. It's one of those books that I think I would probably get more out of on a reread, but I'm not sure that I liked it enough to do a reread, at least not right away. So this would be good for anyone who likes a story with a lot of layers, with myths or fairy tales, and I think it's worth it just for the writing. The next buddy read begins like this. My father, James Witherspoon, is a bigamist. And this is from Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones, which I read with Nikki from Red Dot Reads, and I am so glad that we read this. This was I think that this was one of my favorite books of the month. The story is about James Witherspoon. Obviously, he has 2 wives and basically 2 families. One family knows about the other family, but the other family does not know that there's this second family. So the story is divided into 2 sections. The first section is narrated by James's daughter, Dana. And Dana finds out that she is the secret daughter. She is used to her father showing up once a week, and she knows that she has a sister. The second part is narrated by James's other daughter, Charisse, and she does not know about Dana. And this is definitely a character-driven novel, and I really like Tayari's writing. I thought she did this so well. This is the second book that I've read by her, and I do want to read more. I have more of her books on my shelf. So as Dana tells her story, there is tension and a building up of these 2 daughters potentially meeting. And Dana and her mother kind of watch the other family from afar, but Dana pushes those boundaries the older she gets. And Charisse is like ignorant to the whole situation, but she does feel a connection to Dana. And of course, the whole time, like I was waiting to see, what would happen if or when their father's secret would be revealed. And I thought the characters were really well developed. I could relate to this story in some ways. So it was interesting to kind of see how I understood some of Dana's perspective about some things. And then I also kind of understood Charisse's perspective as well. It was an interesting duality. And Nikki made a really good point when we were talking that, the book had not been divided into 2 parts, but instead was told in alternating perspectives throughout the entire novel, that it probably would have kind of built up more of that tension, and I think that she's probably right about that. It would be interesting to read it that way. There are some very tense scenes, and I thought that this was just an interesting story that focuses, on 1 or 2, in this case, families. So this is a great novel for anyone who enjoys character-driven stories, family dynamics, and I think it's beautiful writing. My final buddy read begins like this. First, I'll tell you about the robbery our parents committed. And I read this with Rainer from Rainier Books. We read Canada by Richard Ford. This is another book that has been sitting on my shelf for quite some time. So I was happy to finally get to it, and then to do it as a buddy read was great. So in some ways, the writing to this felt similar to Silver Sparrow in how the characters are developed, and there's a bit of that tension. This book is narrated by Dell, who is 15 years old when his parents rob a bank. And it tells the story of what happens kind of leading up to that robbery, and then what happened to him and his twin sister afterwards. So the story is told by an older Dell who is reflecting back, trying to make sense of, everything that has happened. And Dell, in many ways, is an unreliable narrator because he's not part of his parents' relationship and their decision-making, and we get the story basically, from an outsider, in some ways from a child or a teenager's perspective of his parents and what happened. So Dell's twin sister, Berner, is very different than him in many ways, especially with the robbery and what happens to their parents. It really affects them both very differently. So the author kind of shows both a flight and fight reaction with the twins. So Berner, the sister, is a bit more mature and a bit more understanding of the ways of the world, where Dell is naive and a lot more innocent. So the writing of this is very interesting in how it foreshadows so much. So sometimes you know what's going to happen, but you just don't know how you're going to get there. And I thought that was really neat, and I was very invested in the first half of the book. The second half, it moves from Montana to Canada, hence the title. In that, I lost some interest once it got to Canada. It didn't have the same draw for me. Dell is taken in by a stranger in Canada and finds himself in another situation, basically, of adults who are just doing things they shouldn't be doing and involved in things they shouldn't be. And Rainer and I still have to do a check-in about the end, so I will share that with him and what I thought about it. But overall, I really liked the book, and I would definitely read more by Richard Ford. So if you have, read anything by him that you really liked and that you really enjoyed, please let me know in the comments below. I would say that this is a good book for anyone who enjoys unreliable narrators, definitely family dynamics, and just interesting foreshadowing. So I also took part in a few group reads in April, but I have only finished one of those so far, and this is the unpopular opinion. So you may have already seen some of the reviews that have gone out today from other booktubers who were part of this group. I will leave links to all of their videos in the description box below, so you can check those out. MJ from Reading This Life hosted the group. So there was myself, Shannon from Shannon's Bookish Musings and Music, and Maria from Read Fine Books. And the first line is, "The circus arrives without warning." And this is from The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I know that this book had a lot of hype when it first came out, and I know many people who loved this book. I am not one of them. It has sat on my shelf for many years, and I thought for sure that it was going to be a 5-star read for me, and I was quite disappointed. I was so worried that I was going to be the only one in the group, who just wasn't enjoying this at all. Thankfully, I wasn't the only one, but this book had so much potential. I loved this setting and the premise, a circus that only comes out at night. There's different kinds of magic. I thought for sure that I would just, kind of want to live in this world, and it would sweep me into this magical world. There's even a competition, and I thought that I could totally get into that, but nope, I did not. And then there's the characters. I thought Celia, who's one of the main characters, had the most potential. A young girl at the beginning of the story, and magic just seems to be part of her soul and just who she is. And then there's Marco, who is being taught magic, but it is more about the illusions of magic. And then there's also sort of kind of a love story between the two of them, which I also didn't care about. So here's the thing. I didn't care about either of them or any of the other characters in the book. Like, they were not well developed. I thought that they were very flat, and I was bored out of my mind reading this book. So I even tried to read it and listen to the audio to see if that would kind of help me get into it and get into it that way, but I just couldn't. So this doesn't mean that it's not a good book for some people. So if you are into fantasies, if you like magic and circuses, then I say give it a try. The next book starts, I Hate Taking Taxis. And this is from Driven, The Secret Lives of Taxi Drivers by Marcello di Cintio, I think it is. This is a nonfiction book about taxi drivers and the taxi driving industry in Canada. I learned about this when it was longlisted for Canada Reads this year. And there are some stories in this that are about like the taxi drivers themselves, gives their history, a bit of their story, and how they became taxi drivers in Canada. And I liked learning about things like Uber and how it has affected the taxi industry. I also liked the information about female drivers and really what is still a very male-dominated job. There are only 10 female drivers in Calgary, where I live, which I thought that was interesting, and it talked about only one of them is willing to work at night. So I thought that this book was very well done. It talks about, taxis and taxi drivers in pop culture, including some books that might be, I think, good to check out. I might have to make a list of those. It also talks about the violence and racism that has been part of the job too, including partnerships between taxi drivers and prostitutes. And I definitely, I think, want to read more from this author because he has written many other things. So he's from here in Calgary, and his other books are also nonfiction. So anyway, this is for anyone who likes nonfiction, if you want to think a little deeper about an occupation that we often take for granted. And if you are interested in hearing, people's stories, then this is a good one to pick up. The final book I finished begins like this. Civilization is neither prose. And this is from the poetry collection called The Book of Smaller by Canadian poet Rob McLennan. So April is National Poetry Month, and normally I would have read way more poetry, but this is the only one that I finished. So Rob is a stay-at-home dad, and some of these poems are kind of about that. They are all written in like paragraph, I'll show you, kind of like paragraph formats. So there's no surprises in structure or anything like that. Some of the poems even have the same title. So there are several poems called 47th Birthday, several called It's Still Winter. So I thought that that was kind of weird. I tried to figure out, the reason why they were broken up, or if they were connected in some way other than the title, but I couldn't figure it out. But some of my favorites were Wing and Ideal Place. And then I think I will share my other two favorites so you can kind of get an idea of the poetry and how it's written. So first I'm going to read, it's called Sentences My Mother Used. And it goes like this. What should we have for dinner? What do you want for your birthday? What is your sister doing? Can you get my pills? Is there anyone in the bathroom? Can you come in here? Whose truck is that? Where is your father? Can you take that out of the oven? Is the cat inside or out? Does the dog have food? Can you get this down for me? What are you doing in there? Get out of there. And then the next one that I want to share is called Daylight Savings. And it goes like this. But first, coffee. What have we saved? Preschooler up with the dawn, morning routine chaos, oatmeal, newspaper, diapers. So much yelling. A mile or more in her red shoes, princess apparel. Such empathy. Exaggerated twirls. The baby laughs, claps her hands. A drop in the bucket, Snow White. Which socks, sweater, wither pants. A seemingly endless discussion. I count the minutes. We have no need for icons. So the poetry is a lot like these two poems. It's like snapshots or kind of like a list of thoughts, and in some cases a list of single words. So this is obviously for someone who likes poetry, who enjoys kind of fragments of life in a way. Yeah, if you like poetry, I say check it out. So those are the books that I read in April. Please let me know if you have read any of these, and what you thought of them. Let me know if you enjoyed my unpopular opinion book, and let me know what books you read in April that were your favorites. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoy your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.